What's going on, everybody? RJ Ochoa here from SB Nation's bloggingtheboys.com. Hope all is well wherever you are. We hope you're happy, safe, healthy, and that you're excited because something is possible. Something is possible now for the Dallas Cowboys that technically was possible before, but has sort of been made more possible. Now, we're putting this video together and releasing it for you on Tuesday, May the 3rd. So May the 3rd be with you, not May the 4th be with you. But May the 2nd, Monday, was an important day because at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, 3 p.m. Central Time on Monday, a very important thing happened. Players who are unrestricted free agents this offseason no longer counted against the compensatory formula. What does that mean? The long story short, the TLDR here is that when players become unrestricted free agents, they count for what the NFL calls the compensatory formula. Basically, how many players a team signs in free agency versus how many players a team loses in free agency come together in this big pot, this big old stew, and ultimately potentially yield compensatory picks for a team in a following offseason. You look at this year, for example, the Dallas Cowboys had 2 fifth-round compensatory picks. So if you lose a big-time free agent, for example, a few years ago when the Cowboys lost Byron Jones to the Miami Dolphins, if you don't sign other people to balance out the compensatory formula, then the next year, if a player signs a big-time deal, plays a lot, etc., then you get maybe a third-round compensatory pick, maybe a fourth round, or like the Cowboys this past draft, got 2 fifth-round compensatory picks. The Dallas Cowboys love their compensatory picks. That's part of the reason why they are not active all too much throughout free agency, because they do not want to impact the compensatory formula. You look at this year, Randy Gregory left in free agency, got big money. Connor Williams, Cedric Wilson, etc. The Dallas Cowboys only signed 3 low-profile free agents so as to not truly impact the compensatory formula. Now, the compensatory formula does not factor in players who were released. If a team cuts a player, the way the Cowboys cut Lyle Collins, for example, then that player does not count against the compensatory formula, weighing that team's chances of getting a pick down. So, all that being said, though, any player who was an unrestricted free agent, or rather who became an unrestricted free agent this offseason, no longer counts against the compensatory formula. That means that the Cowboys can now sign players who were unrestricted free agents, who were on expiring contracts, in other words, without worrying about their overall process being impacted. So, we've put together a few names to pay attention to that the Dallas Cowboys may consider signing. I know the draft just happened, but still, as Stephen Jones loves to say, roster construction is a 24/7, 365 business in the NFL. In fact, Stephen has said a few times this offseason, a few times lately, in fact, he said it right before the draft, that the Dallas Cowboys were not done in free agency. So the first name on our list, first to 5 for you, is Jason Pierre-Paul. Now, I know the Cowboys drafted D. Williams in the second round, so their need at defensive end isn't necessarily as large as it was a week ago. However, you can never have enough pass rushers in the NFL. Plus, we know that the Cowboys were connected to Jason Pierre-Paul in the early days of free agency. JPP has still been productive over the last couple of years with the Buccaneers, namely 2 years ago, and anytime you can get a veteran presence in there, I think that that's a wise idea. Now, obviously, all the players that we're talking about, nobody is saying that the Cowboys are going to bring in for big money, but if you can get some sort of low, not quite veteran minimum, but team-friendly deal with Jason Pierre-Paul at this point in time, I think you could be a lot worse off. If your platoon of pass rushers featured DeMarcus Lawrence, now D. Williams, obviously Dorrance Armstrong, Terrell Basham, Chauncey Golston, I mean, you're all of a sudden in a place where you feel a little bit better if you add Jason Pierre-Paul to that mix. Again, we know the Cowboys are interested in Jason Pierre-Paul. We now know that he no longer impacts the compensatory formula. The math here makes a lot of sense if the Cowboys do want to bring in a veteran. This is a position, defensive end, where you need a lot of bodies. You need a lot of accomplished bodies. Obviously, Micah Parsons is going to play a pass rusher several times throughout the season in a given game, whatever, but you can never, ever have enough. I'm excited about D. Williams. I know you're excited about D. Williams. We talked to D. Williams during our draft coverage. You can watch that interview here on the Blog on the Boys YouTube channel, but the reality is that generally speaking, rookie pass rushers don't make all too big of an impact during their first season in the NFL. I know Micah Parsons did it last year. He is the exception. Maybe D. Williams will be an exception in his own right, but it wouldn't be a bad idea to hedge your bet, and therefore, if you're the Dallas Cowboys, to go out and get somebody like Jason Pierre-Paul. And along those lines, I'm going to put this name here because it's mandatory. I don't think we can get by if we don't put this name on here, but I will say I think this one is pretty unlikely. Jadeveon Clowney. The reason I think this is unlikely, because I know you're probably thinking, let's do it. Let's go, baby. Bring him in. Clowney to the Cowboys. Vamonos. Clowney is not quite Darrelle Revis, and by that I mean late in Darrelle Revis' career, he had become a master at securing big-time bag after big-time bag after big-time bag. But Clowney does not show up somewhere for cheap. He's played with a lot of different teams in the last few years, but he has not come cheap. He generally waits. He generally doesn't, participate throughout the normal offseason, the rigors of an offseason. And so if this happens, it's probably not, until training camp even. But that being said, Clowney is not going to show up for the kinds of dollars that the Dallas Cowboys are going to be willing to hand out. So while this one, again, makes sense from a math perspective, he was on an expiring deal with the Cleveland Browns. The compensatory formula is no longer impacted. The Cowboys still kind of have a need at the pass rusher position despite drafting D. Williams. It really does feel unlikely. I think if we have to weigh the likelihoods of either one of the two pass rushers that we have discussed so far here today, between Jason Pierre-Paul and Jadeveon Clowney, if I had to bet on it, I would say that Jason Pierre-Paul is much more likely. Now, let's move on. Player number 3. We have 5 that we're discussing here again today. The last 2 are kind of unique. But player number 3, the last sort of true player that all of a sudden makes more sense now that the comp picks are no longer impacted by them. I know the Cowboys drafted Jalen Tolbert, my favorite pick throughout this draft class. I'm assuming your favorite pick throughout this draft class. I'm in no way saying that this would be a slight against Jalen Tolbert. However, if you could sign Will Fuller, I don't know how you don't consider it. Will Fuller is one of the fastest wide receivers to have played in the NFL in recent memory, takes the top off of a defense, a true classic, vintage, and modern, even at the same time, deep threat. Very Deshaun Jackson-ish, very Will Fuller-ish. He's been doing it for a long time. This is going to be his 7th season in the NFL, so it's been a long time that we've seen Will Fuller exploding for big-time touchdown plays, obviously mostly with the Houston Texans. Now, we look at the wide receiver group for the Dallas Cowboys. Yes, they did just draft Jalen Tolbert, but a lot of us thought that they might double dip at the wide receiver position throughout the draft, which they did not. Now they do have a lot of undrafted free agents that we're excited about. Certainly, maybe one of them finds a way to make it onto the roster. The only position the Cowboys double dipped at when it came to the draft was along the offensive line and linebacker, but the Damone Clark thing is kind of unique, which is a whole different subject entirely. So that being said, if we think about the wide receiver position, the wide receiver group for the Cowboys, obviously it's headlined by CeeDee Lamb, but Michael Gallup is likely going to miss, maybe like a month at the beginning of the season. You've obviously got now rookie Jalen Tolbert, but outside of that, what do you have? James Washington? I know there are some people who are excited and he has some kind of home run potential in his own right, but are we really going to feel comfortable about that? We have Simi Fehoko entering second year. We have Noah Brown. I mean, it is not necessarily a group that you can feel great about. Yes, you have other pass-catching options like Dalton Schultz, and we'll see what Jake Ferguson develops into as well. You've got Sean McEwen. You've obviously got options out of the backfield in Ezekiel Elliott and Tony Pollard. But if Will Fuller is an option for the Dallas Cowboys, I think they have to pursue that. I think that it makes so much sense. It adds strength to a position group that has obviously been weakened with the trading of Amari Cooper. Yes, they drafted Jalen Tolbert, but they're still weaker relative to who they were last year. They can bring in Will Fuller. They go a long way towards bridging that gap. I would love to see this. Now, I mentioned that the last 2 names that we were going to discuss here today were a bit unique, and what I mean by that is I said earlier that if players were released by their teams, that they would not impact the compensatory formula. The 2 players that we're about to get to were released by their team. So the Cowboys could have signed these players even prior to the draft, right when they were released, and not had them impact any sort of compensatory formula. But the Cowboys, like every NFL team, sometimes likes to see what they ultimately get when it comes to the NFL draft, right? Like, what do we walk away with? What do we know we need? What needs did we wind up addressing? And so if we keep along the thought process, of wide receiver, I know that different people feel different ways here, but I don't know how you can at least consider or talk about Cole Beasley. Obviously, somebody who has a history with the Dallas Cowboys, a very successful history, the end, the divorce, whatever you want to call it, how he left to Buffalo after the 2018 season. Wasn't great, wasn't fun, but he is still an incredibly productive slot receiver. I would love to see CeeDee Lamb operate primarily in the slot, but the Cowboys like to think about and operate and put things together differently and, the way they want to do things. And that's fine. That's cool. But get an option in here. Get a legitimate option. Cole Beasley is still, again, a highly productive slot receiver in today's NFL. You can argue that he wore out his welcome with the Bills and all this stuff, whatever. We're not here to talk about that, but he is highly productive. He generally doesn't miss games. He is somebody who I think you have to consider. And while, again, he has been available from this perspective, the comp pick perspective, for a long time, the Cowboys only walked away with 1 wide receiver in the NFL draft. So I think they have to be at least talking about adding another wide receiver. And if they are, then Cole Beasley makes sense. And look, I mentioned that the Cowboys did double dip at the linebacker position, but like we talked about when I said it, Damone Clark's kind of a unique thing. The Cowboys are saying the right things and doing the right things, and that it's possible he could play in 2022. And it is, right? Like, it would be stupid to sit here and say, yeah, he's not going to play at all this season, whatever. But if we're, again, hedging and we're thinking fairly and we're thinking wisely, it's unlikely that Damone Clark is going to play in 2022, right? So the only linebacker depth that you have added this offseason is Devin Harper, your last pick, your 6th-round selection. Okay, you did bring back Leighton Vander Esch, you did bring back Luke Gifford, but the only person there that's really playing on defense for you and not really just primarily special teams is Leighton Vander Esch. And cool, he stayed healthy last year, but how likely is that again? I would love for it to happen again in 2022, but we are talking about hedging bets here. And if you are, I think you have to look at the linebacker spot because he didn't come away with one. I know we talked about Nakobe Dean and Devin Lloyd even and all these different names, and the Cowboys chose to go different directions, and that's fine because you do have veteran free agency that's available to you right now. So if you're looking for a veteran linebacker, if you're looking for somebody to kind of be a leader for your team, if you're looking for somebody to kind of be a great older brother presence for Micah Parsons, not that he needs it, but especially somebody to allow Micah Parsons the mobility to rush the passer and therefore allow linebacker to be taken care of by other people and other players. And I've mentioned this name many times before if you've watched our stuff here. I don't know how you aren't considering Anthony Hitchens. Again, like Cole Beasley, somebody who has a history with the team, somebody who was released by his team, so therefore was available. But I've been saying throughout all the mock drafts and things we did that if the Cowboys did not walk away with a linebacker, a top linebacker option in the NFL draft, that Anthony Hitchens kind of felt like something in their back pocket that they could pull off. Hitch, right when he was released by Kansas City, actually said, it was reported by the Dallas Morning News, that he had an interest in returning to the Cowboys. So this one really does feel kind of likely, actually. If I had to measure the likelihoods of all these, I would say that maybe Anthony Hitchens is the most likely, maybe Jason Pierre-Paul is the second most likely, maybe Cole Beasley and Will Fuller kind of tied for third and fourth, therefore, and that would make Jadeveon Clowney last. None of these moves, to be very clear, are going to dramatically shift who the Cowboys are right now, but they are great, solid depth moves that can pay off when you are in the rigors of an NFL season. We know it's a battle of attrition. We know that it's a long year. We know it's a long campaign. So if you can have bodies to help survive it, that's certainly a very good thing. My name is RJ Ochoa. You know me from all throughout the Blog and the Boys universe. You can follow me on Twitter or Instagram at RJ Ochoa. You can also check me out on TikTok at rj.ochoa. If email is more your speed, you can hit me up at rj.ochoa@sbnation.com. The NFL draft may have happened, but the content does not stop around here. Later today, Tuesday night, we have our Blog and the Boys live roundtable discussion. Tomorrow, a new episode of the NFC's Mixtape. We're always dropping new videos for you here. We never sleep. We love to talk about the Dallas Cowboys 24/7, 365, and we thank you for joining us to do it every single time. Thanks a lot, everybody. We'll see you next time.